Manish Mehta of the New York Daily News with Armen and Levack on 104.5 The Team. And Manish, we're trying to figure this out. Chan Gailey says there's not going to be a quarterback competition. This week, Todd Bowles says there is going to be a quarterback competition. It's a brand new staff, but Levack and I have found ourselves this week saying over and over, it's the same old Jets.
Well, I mean, I think that's a little bit extreme. I think if you're looking for the truth, it's probably closer to the way that Chan Gailey described it than Todd Bowles, because ultimately the organization wants to give Geno Smith the opportunity to be the starting quarterback, and it is going to be very difficult, if you're honest with yourself, for Geno to lose the job in the preseason, because he's not going to face elaborate defenses. He's not going to get that many snaps and reps in these preseason games. So they're keeping their fingers crossed that he can learn Gailey's system and be the guy to to lead them to hope what they hope would be a playoff berth.
Now, when we have Chan Gailey saying it one way and Todd Bowles saying it the other way, is this just a miscommunication, or is this Chan kind of like saying, "Hey, I'm in charge of the offense"? Or where does this come from?
I think Chan's just more matter of fact about things, and I think he looks at it like, unless Geno Smith gets hurt, there's really not going to be that many opportunities for Ryan Fitzpatrick with the first team to legitimately compete with him. And the way that Todd Bowles looks at it, as he should, is that nobody is given an opportunity to be the starter, especially a guy who's been up and down. So I think they're looking at it in the same way. They're expressing it differently. I think Gailey is more looking at it like odds are that Geno's going to hold on to the job, so he will be the starter, whereas Bowles says, Geno's going to have to earn it. I'm not going to jump that fast forward to week one and say he's the starter. But ultimately, I think both those guys look at it the same way, in that they think it's Geno's job to lose. And if you're practical about it, it's probably going to be very difficult for him to lose the job.
Manish Mehta of the New York Daily News, at MMehta, NYDN on Twitter. And Manish, you wrote a column earlier this week about how Ryan Fitzpatrick deserves a fair shot at this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the organization's stance on how they're handling it. I don't think there's a big rift between Bowles and Gailey, as I said. But I think what would be fair and really do the team right is if both Fitzpatrick and Geno Smith had a fair shot, at least in those first few weeks before the first preseason game, where each guy gets an equal opportunity to practice with the starters. You saw that a couple years ago when Geno was a rookie and he was competing against Mark Sanchez. You can say what you want about the way Rex Ryan handled quarterbacks in the past, but I thought the way they started off that competition in camp was the smart thing to do. They had those guys alternate every third day. So Geno would have 2 days of reps with the starters, and then Sanchez would have 2 days of reps, and so on and so forth. Now, they altered the plan drastically after Geno got hurt in the first preseason game, but I thought initially the thought going in was the smart thing to do, and I think that the Jets should do the same thing. I think they should give both Fitzpatrick and Geno Smith an equal opportunity in those first few weeks in camp to get acclimated with the starters and then see, which guy wins the job in those first two preseason games.
Now, Manish, you're obviously plugged into the organization as much as anybody out there. I'm interested in your opinion on Geno Smith. This is finally his opportunity for the Jets to say, you know what? We're giving him this shot. This is Geno's to lose. He gets this time. And that way, if he does fail in the future, they can say, man, he had every opportunity to get this thing right. Is that an aspect of that here?
Sure, absolutely. And you're right. They're not married to him. So if he does lose the job early in the season, they'll move on with Fitzpatrick. But I think that the way that Todd Bowles looks at it is this, and he said as much at the owners' meetings a few months ago, is that you try to win with the pieces that you have until you get the pieces that you want. And they clearly don't have the piece that they want at quarterback right now. That didn't materialize in the draft. Maybe a guy like Bryce Petty could develop over the next couple of years. They're hopeful of that, but they're also realistic that nothing's going to happen on the Petty front immediately in 2015. So they look at what they have, and realistically for 2015, that means Fitzpatrick, who's a veteran, who understands Gailey's offense, but admittedly, is probably more apt to be a backup at this stage of his career. And you got a guy like Geno Smith, who has had an erratic first two seasons, but he has shown some promise, and they're hoping that some of those glimpses of promise that they saw in that old offense, that West Coast offense that they were running, can manifest itself in Gailey's offense, which should be tailored more to what Geno Smith is accustomed to and what he thrived at West Virginia.
Why did the Jets release Sims, and why did they do it so soon?
Well, he requested to be released. He knew that there wasn't going to be a spot after they drafted Bryce Petty. Obviously, Geno Smith, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Bryce Petty were not going anywhere. So it's really a matter of being released at the end of May or being released at some point during training camp or at some point before Week 1. I think this is the right move by the Jets. They know that Sims wasn't a part of their plans, and if he gets cut now, at least he has an opportunity to maybe latch on with the team before their mini camp and certainly before training camps begin. So, the writing was on the wall for Matt Sims after they drafted Petty, and he knew it.
Manish Mehta of the New York Daily News, at MMehtaNYDN on Twitter. Manish, your first impressions of Chan Gailey, a guy that a year ago said in order for him to get back into coaching, it would have to, quote-unquote, be a very special situation. Just your thoughts on the way that he's conducted himself so far, the amount of control that he does have of this offense.
Well, he's, like I said before, he's pretty matter-of-fact. He's pretty blunt and honest, which is great for the media because you want that kind of transparency from your coaches that you cover. And in terms of having control of the offense, I think there's no doubt that he's got the full control of the offense. Now, that being said, Bowles is involved in team meetings. He is more engaged on the offensive side. I think he's very mindful of what happened with Rex Ryan, who's tended to lean heavily on the defensive side. And from time to time, admittedly, kind of was hands-off on the offense. And I think that with Bowles overseeing the big picture, and being involved in terms of sitting in on meetings, I think that's important. But in terms of decision-making and philosophy, that's going to be Chan Gailey's call. And obviously, when you talk about in-game philosophy, the head coach has final say. But in terms of how the offense is going to be structured and how it's going to be run, Bowles is going to give Gailey, autonomy to do that.
Now, a lot of Jets, skipping the voluntary OTAs, but the one catapulted in the mainstream because he took it to Twitter is Sheldon Richardson.
Yeah. This is really an interesting question. It's a debate that I have with other reporters, other players privately, and I'm of the mindset that it's not a big deal. And I understand that people say, well, he should be there, even though it's voluntary, because he is obviously one of the better players for a team that has a new coaching staff in place and a new philosophy in place, so he should be there. Now, he's not blowing off these OTAs. He is attending OTAs, and Bowles estimated it was probably about half the time. He was, as far as I know, he was there once this week, maybe twice, but certainly once in the first two practices. I don't think it's a big deal, especially for defensive linemen. You're not allowed really full contact. And if you know anything about Sheldon Richardson, you know that he is 100% all in with the team. He is a team guy when minicamp rolls around, when training camp rolls around, and certainly when the regular season rolls around. He puts forth good effort. He's not a selfish player. So just knowing that about him and being around him these last couple of years, I don't think it's a big deal that he's not here. But I certainly do understand the sentiment that because he is one of the better players and the leaders and the young leaders on this team, and there is a new coaching staff, that he should be here all the time.
Manish Mehta of the New York Daily News. How do you expect the Mohammed Wilkerson situation to play itself out, both short-term and long-term?
Well, short-term, he's definitely going to be on the team in 2015. He's not going anywhere. He could take a hard-line stance and sit out and boycott in that way, but he will get fined. He doesn't have leverage. And it's unfortunate because he's been a very productive player. I think an extremely underrated player in this league for a few years. But it's a cruel business. The NFL is a cruel business, and when you look at the bottom line, the team does not have to pay him. He's owed $6.97 million as part of his fifth-year team option, and they do have the luxury of now having another young defensive lineman in Leonard Williams, who they picked up in the draft, so that if Wilkerson did take a hard line stance, which I don't anticipate he would, but if he chose to take that route, I think the Jets D-line would still be extremely productive with Sheldon Richardson and Damon Harrison and now Leonard Williams. So he is really in a predicament here. I know that the team wants to strike a long-term deal with him, but they want him to be reasonable. And the big question in all these negotiations is always, how do you define the term reasonable? Reasonable is in the eye of the beholder, and I think that I think that Wilkerson views what is reasonable differently at this point than what the team views as reasonable.
Is he looking for Sue money?
No, he's not looking for Sue money. I think he's looking for a shade under J.J. Watt money. And when you look at the breakdown of his contract, he had $51 million in guaranteed money, I think, probably a better benchmark would be what Robert Quinn got. And he got about $31 million in the first 3 years of the 4-year extension. He got about $40 million in guaranteed money. And I think if you look at parallels in terms of what makes the most sense financially, I think if he got paid, in that neighborhood, that would be fair and reasonable. He's a player who obviously wants to maximize, what he can get. So maybe there's a middle ground between now and the start of training camp. The next interesting part of of this whole ordeal here is whether he shows up for minicamp, because that is mandatory. And if he doesn't show up, he will get fined.
Now, just first impressions on the rookie Leonard Williams.
Well, from what I can see, he's probably got a lot of opportunities in this defense to do a lot of good things early, and you can only go by what the coaches tell you and what teammates tell you, because again, defensive linemen don't have full contact in these drills. We do have a limited amount of exposure to them in the off season, but I thought that Bowles put it best the other day when he said that he's more mature than your average rookie in terms of getting to meetings, in terms of being engaged in meetings, in terms of asking a lot of questions in meetings. Sometimes you get rookies who are quiet, who defer a lot, and who don't say much. And if you're a coach, you don't know how to take that. You don't know if that's just because he's overwhelmed with the information he's getting, or if he's just quiet by nature. But the coaches are very pleased with what they've seen from him, and it's obviously extremely early. We'll get a much better idea when you can actually put on pads and tackle. But he's got the instincts, he's got the ability, the physical skill set to thrive in this league, and it would not surprise me at all if he thrived quickly in this league.
Manish Mehta of the New York Daily News on that Jets beat, one of the best, at M-Mehta, NYDN on Twitter. And Manish, no wagers out there right now about hitchhiking or anything of that regard, right? I'm trying to keep track.
No, I think I learned my lesson.
Good stuff. Manish, always appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Take care.